A beautiful Sunday morning, friends, e-life leaders, everyone also tuning in with us online. It's a beautiful Sunday morning. So we did not meet yesterday, instead we meet today. So today we will be talking about the faithful Jesus. That's our topic for today, right? So just like I started the last time, no? Are we going to present Jesus again as a baby? Because that's the name of the season in proclaiming the gospel. As you all know, historically, of course, they talked about the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ, but they didn't celebrate it the way we do right now. And I started last week talking about how the book of Hebrews presented Jesus, and he didn't start from the birth of Jesus Christ. In fact, he kind of skipped of it. He just said that he came into this world to be a human being with a human body. Um, but he started with Jesus being sent from heaven, and he is the creator of all things that exist. So the same thing with all the teachings of the other apostles, that they presented Jesus Christ as the creator of all things. He was from the beginning. So our points last week was talked about God sent His Son, that we should exalt Jesus, we should worship Jesus, because God commanded His angels to worship Jesus, and so should we. And that we have to be aware or beware of the consequences of drifting away from Jesus. Why? Because the context of the book of Hebrews is he was encouraging many Jewish believers to stay with the faith and not drift away, and because they were having difficult time with the persecution against them. As you would remember, most of the first believers in Jesus Christ were Jews, and they had a hard time really getting transferring. It's not really transferring, but accepting that Jesus is the Messiah. It's not we talked about that it is consistent with the Old Testament. It is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. It's kind of getting away from Judaism, which has drifted away actually from the Old Testament. And this is the real fulfillment of the New Testament, Christianity, of the Old Testament. So, and understand why Jesus had to take on human nature. He had to become a human being so that he can be one of us. All right. And I'll continue with that with today's message. So the title of our message today is Faithful Jesus. We'll be covering at the end of book of Hebrews chapter 2. We'll be skipping a little bit of chapter 4, which is more like of an interlude, and end in chapter 5. So I'll be again sharing 3 points about how Jesus has been faithful. The first is he is a faithful brother in the family of God. Uh, in our message for today, we have 3 points. He is a brother, he's a son of God, he's the son of God, and he is the high priest. Right. So let's read first chapter 2 verse 14. Actually, I ended my message last week with this one, and I'm going to start with it as well. Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he likewise shared in the humanity, so that through death he could destroy the one who holds the power of death. Uh, that is the devil. Verse 15, and set free those who were held in slavery all their lives by their fear of death. For surely this concern is not for angels, but he is concerned for Abraham's descendants. So, as I was explaining to you, they were experiencing so much persecution to the point that some of the believers were already condemned to death, just like Stephen. And because they were able to do that to Stephen, and Paul did as well, many other Jewish believers were also martyred because of that. Yung story about Stephen was the beginning of it. It's like they were able to kill Jesus. They were not able to kill Peter and John in Acts chapter 4. But when they were able to do so with one of them, Stephen, it started the wave of more severe persecution against Christians. And if there was no charge against the Jews for killing someone, which was illegal, for their faith in Jesus Christ, that started again the trend of being of more severe persecution, because the Jews didn't fear of being prosecuted for killing Christians, Jewish believers. faithful brother. Now, why do we say faithful brother? Because it says there, we are children. Jesus share in flesh and blood, and he likewise share in their humanity. Again, Jesus had to become human so that he could experience death. Now, again, it's not easy to deal with death when you are being persecuted for the faith. No, whatever kind of death. Maybe when you are suffering so much from sickness, maybe you would want to think of dying. No, I just read yesterday about this. If my memory serves me right, there's in Sweden, they made this sort of a capsule, sort of that they can fill up with nitrogen, and it was a legal way for those who wish to die because of sickness, to die without the assistance of doctors. Well, of course, somebody has to start that. Um, so because in that country, um, self assisted suicide is legal, and euthanasia as well, but not in other countries. Just like here in the Philippines, we are not allowed to euthanize people, but maybe for animals we could do that. So there's this fear of death, especially for being persecuted. But Jesus faced death, and he did not fear death. So he's encouraging the brothers, that's us, not to fear death, because through fear death, he conquered the power of death. Of course, we're not going to conquer the power of death when we die. Only Jesus could do that. But the idea in there is he did not fear death, because death is not the end of it all. And he did it for us. For surely his concern is not for angels, but he is concerned for Abraham's descendants. So Jesus cares so much for people that he became one of us. And he, in fact, he led the way. He's the first one to die and then to rise again from the dead. Right? So we may not be facing the same kind of threat as Christians here in the Philippines. Maybe in other countries, probably, especially in the Middle East, where Christianity is illegal. But we know for a fact that when the enemy, when it's his time to the Antichrist to show up himself and reveal himself, he's gonna put to death many Christians. And when that time comes, we should not fear death. Even for now, we should not fear death, because Jesus himself experienced it and he wasn't fearful of it at all. Verse 17, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. He was fully human, not half human. He was made like his brothers. Of course, that includes women, sisters, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest, because he can understand what we're going through, especially those who are persecuted for their faith. As a high priest, he's showing mercy. Now, at the last point, we will go back to this point, okay, in letter C, because the author is introducing here the concept of Jesus being the high priest, okay, and he's gonna skip that in the next chapters. Anyway, he's just introducing here the concept of high priest, that the high priest understands those whom he intercedes for. Remember, a high priest is an intercessor, a mediator between God and human beings, right? In the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. Now, that's an old term, propitiation. Basically, it's a payment for sins, a sacrifice for sins. Propitiation is to cover the sins through the sacrifice. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Again, the author of Hebrews is thinking about the brothers who are suffering, who are scared of being executed for their faith. And he is picturing Jesus as a faithful brother, not someone who is alien from us, whom we can understand. Well, he could do that because he is a great person, and he is a supernatural being. No, he was made like his brothers in every respect. He understands every emotion that we have, every sin. He didn't experience it. He didn't commit sin, of course, but every difficulty that we go, temptation to commit sin, that's in verse 18. So Jesus did not cheat his way while being human and divine. He experienced much suffering with severe temptations. As I've explained to you some time ago, I think I did so last week, Jesus was able to experience the most difficult, severe, and hardest temptations of all, because all the temptations that the enemy could bring upon him, he did to Jesus Christ. Unlike for us, the enemy didn't have to tempt us in every way, because with only a few temptations, the enemy knows that we are gonna succumb to temptation. So he didn't have to put all of those to us, but he did that to Jesus Christ, because Jesus was so tough, because Jesus was so successful against temptations. And he's encouraging us, we can also be successful, because Jesus, as a brother, was successful against temptations. Now, being a human being does not necessarily mean that you have to commit sin. God didn't create us to commit sin. We had the potential to commit sin. Adam had the potential to commit sin, but God did not make Adam sinful. He sinned on his own volition. So again, the author is encouraging us. I understand. Jesus understands how difficult it is for you to experience all these temptations. Now, the temptation part, more particularly that he was concerned, is about to drift, which is drifting away. We talked about that last week. Drifting away from the faith, giving up the confession, which is Jesus Christ. So don't give up or give into the temptation of leaving the faith, of leaving Jesus Christ, because Jesus was faithful and he will be faithful to you. All right? That's only a short point that we have to make in the first point. But I'd really like to emphasize that Jesus is not only an example of enduring sufferings. He's not just saying to us, I understand what you're going through because I have been through what you're going through. In fact, because of me, people are persecuting you. Jesus explained that ahead of time to his disciples. But I am able to help you. He is able to help those who are being tempted. So therefore, we have to ask Jesus for help. When we are being tempted, he offers us help as we face difficult temptations, so that we don't have to fall into temptation, so that we don't have to commit sin. In fact, it is very possible. We just have to look to Jesus and ask for his help. God, Lord Jesus, I'm having a difficult time holding on to you, because they're just pressuring me to give up my faith. They're deceiving me from. They're picturing you as a liar. They're picturing you not as the Son of God. They're telling lies about you, or if they're forcing me, even if they could not disprove that you are the Son of God. They're still forcing me to turn away from Christianity, to turn away from you. Now, we know in our times, most of the temptations we go through is really distraction, worldliness, self-help, or popularity. People are uh, envious about other people who are famous, and everyone wants to be famous. That's not the point here. Jesus Christ, he served God. You find there in verse 17, he's a merciful, faithful high priest in the service of God. He was serving God, not himself. All right? So the second point is a faithful son in the house of God. So a while ago, a faithful brother for us, he is a brother for us. Now he's a faithful son in relation to God. Now, why house of God? I'll explain when we go to that verse. Now we turn to chapter 3. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters, partners in a heavenly calling, take note of Jesus, the apostle and high priest, whom we confess. So Jesus is our confession. He's the one that we proclaim, who is faithful to the one who appointed him, as Moses also was also in God's house. So, what are we in Jesus? It's very important. Okay, it's very important. People may portray you as some other things, but the scriptures tell us that we are holy. We are holy. We are not dirty anymore from sins. We have been cleansed from our sins, and therefore we're not part of the sinful system of this world. Second, we are partners in the heavenly calling. That means this world is not our it's not our ultimate place. We're called for heaven. And we're partners. That means you're not the only ones going through this. We're all in this together. Jesus is the one leading us. So he said, you are our partners. Don't abandon the partnership. All right? And who is Jesus for us? He's the apostle and high priest. So when we say apostle, okay, he's not one of those apostles that he appointed, the 12, of course, and all those he sent out, because he did not only send the 12. He sent a lot of people, and primarily the 12 were the leaders. Apostle is someone who is being sent out. So he was sent out by God. And high priest, they are juxtaposed. That means they come together. You can't separate them. He was sent out to become a high priest. And he is the one that we confess. He's the one that we proclaim. He's the one that we uplift. He's the one that we worship and we exalt. And we're proud of that. And later on, we'll talk about we're proud of that. And the picture of Jesus here is he is faithful. That's why that's our title. He was a faithful brother for us, that he experienced all the sufferings, and he did that, given to temptation and to sin, and now he's a faithful son to God. So he was thinking more about the one who appointed him, to whom he will have to give an account, and it's God. And he's being compared with Moses. Now, why is that so? Because of the many messengers and prophets of God, Moses is probably the most respected of all. It's because he was the one that God used to deliver his people from Israel, and he's the one that received the law and gave the law to the people. And without the law, they would not have any word from the Lord for them. So he is regarded as very high. But here he compliments, the author of Hebrews compliments Moses. If Moses was faithful, Jesus was also faithful in God's house. So does the book of Hebrews put down Moses to exalt Jesus? No. In fact, he compliments him. But he elevates Jesus to a greater degree. Verse 3, for he has come to deserve greater glory than Moses. Why is that so? Remember, Moses was glorious because he was reflecting the light of God after he had spent a long time with him. And soon that glory would fade away. So it was not really the glory of Moses, it was the glory of God reflected upon Moses. But Jesus had his own glory because he is the one who revealed himself to Moses. Right? So why is that so? Why is he greater? Does he deserve greater glory? But in this case, greater glory means greater praise, greater admiration, greater exaltation, greater respect. That's what it means. Not the Shekinah glory. Some people would say Shekinah glory. Okay. Just as the builder of a house deserves greater honor than the house itself. So there's a comparison here. Jesus is the builder, and it's who is greater than the house. Now, what is that house there? For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. So let's focus on Jesus first. With Jesus, we have received a greater person from God, and that is his Son. He is the builder. Now, it resonates what he said in chapter 1, verse 2. That Jesus is, God has revealed himself to us through his Son, and through whom he created the world. So, he is the Son, is Jesus Christ here in chapter 1, verse 2. So Jesus is revealed as God here, the builder of all things. So it's really actually Jesus who built the house of God. And therefore he deserves greater glory. If we admire the house of God, now of course we would, at this time, the Jews would imagine the tabernacle or the temple of the Lord, which was very important for them, right? Because it is really the center of worship in Jerusalem, the most important place in Jerusalem. And many of them have been driven out of Israel because of persecution. Not just persecution from, most likely persecution from their fellow Jews. But eventually, after several decades, all the Jews were being expelled from their own land. But at this time, they could live peaceably in their own land. But the Jewish Christians, or believers, were being driven out of Israel. Now, verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all of God's house. A quotation from Numbers chapter 12, verse 7. And we believe that. But only as a servant, to testify to the things that would be spoken. Prophetic. But Christ is faithful as a son over God's house. We are of his house, in fact we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope that we take pride in. So this is what I was talking about, that we're proud of what we have. Now let's focus first on Moses. Again, they look up to Moses as very high. They would say, "We're children of Abraham, and we follow the law of Moses." Actually, if we think about it, we should be saying, or they should be saying, "We follow the law of the Lord." Right? From time to time, they would call it the law of the Lord, but in some other times they would address it, call it as the law of Moses. Now, the important thing here is faithfulness again. Even if as a servant Moses was faithful, so again the author was encouraging the Jewish believers to be faithful, and he is encouraging all of us to be faithful to our confession, to be faithful to Jesus Christ, to be faithful to the Lord. And not only that, again, he said it a while ago, Christ is faithful as a son over God's household. So there's a difference between a servant and a son. And we know that Jesus is the only Son of God. We are adopted children of God. Not all are, we are all created by God, but we're not all children of God. Some of us have become children of God by adoption. And in this case, Moses is the servant of the house. So he is not the owner of the house. But as a son, he is also the owner of the house because he is the heir of God. So be faithful just like Moses. Jesus is God's son, has authority, and is the owner of God's house. And we are of his house, right? His opponents and heretics, because there are Christians who have turned heretics, they have taught different theologies about Jesus Christ, would call Jesus the son of Mary. And we find that actually in Mark chapter 6 and Mark chapter 13. They wouldn't address Jesus as the Son of God because they deny that Jesus is the Son of God. They would call him Son of Mary, Son of Mary. You're just a human being. You're just an ordinary person just like one of us. Well, because they saw him fully human when Jesus was here. But he was more than a human. He is the Son of God. But the evangelists would always proclaim him as the Son of God. Now, if you deny that, you would put him down as a servant, and perhaps you would put him as a lower servant than Moses, right? So that's why people take pride in following the law of Moses, but we take pride in following Jesus as the Son of God. So he is faithful, and we should also be faithful to the Son, as Jesus was faithful to his Father. Now, as God's house, we should listen to the Son because we are part of his house. Okay? So imagine if a child who is a part of the house and is not obedient. What do you expect from that person to receive? Maybe just like we say in Tagalog, kung pasaway kang anak, no, if maybe soon if you keep on your bad behavior, you could be expelled out of the house because you are not following rules, you're not being obedient. But we are of his house if in fact there's a condition. But this condition is stated as an encouragement. Because the author is reminding us that we have this responsibility to hold firmly to our confidence. Once you lose that confidence, would be easier for you to let go of the hope. So again, the book of Hebrews encourage faithfulness to the house or the people of God as Moses and the Christ were. So confidence talks about the inner strength. You got that inner strength because of the hope that you have. So the hope is something external. And because of that hope that we have, that is set for us in the future, which is said in chapter 5, realizing the future, it's just one of the most important words in the book of Hebrews. We shouldn't let go of that hope. We shouldn't also lose confidence. There is no reason for you to lose confidence. Remember, Jesus has already completed his job. And later on, we'll go to that in our last point. If Jesus was able to complete the job, okay, we can also be confident that we will be able to complete our job. We will be able to complete the race here. So don't lose that confidence. If you begin to lose that confidence, if you begin to lose that heart, you will not hold on to that to the faith. And if you're proud of it, you see, if you understand the hope, that there is no other hope, that this is the only hope, the hope of eternity, the hope of being with God, the hope that Jesus already accomplished for us, as stated in Hebrews chapter 12. If we have that pride, that means if we're not ashamed of it, that means if we're not gonna compromise it, in fact, we don't just believe in it, we're proud of it. And if our opponents see that we're proud of it, we're not about to give it up or compromise it, then there's nothing that can put us down. Not even the threat of being put to death for our faith. In fact, in another uh, passage here in Hebrews, you haven't come to the point of bloodshed. I think it's in Hebrews chapter 10. I mean, there's a threat of being martyred, but you haven't reached that point yet. So don't 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 lose hope. Don't lose confidence because of these threats. Don't drift away from the faith. Verse 14. Therefore, since we uh, now I jump, okay, from chapter 3 verse 6 to chapter 4 verse 14. Why? It's because there's an interlude, okay? Just like in the previous passage, there was an interlude, like an insert discussing what was that interlude? He was warning against unbelief, okay? And he was encouraging them to enter the rest, okay? We're not going to discuss that today. So we're going back to where he left, okay, in chapter 2, verse 18. So we're jumping, okay, because he's going back to that topic. So here again, we go in chapter 4, verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. Again, there's this um, uh, encouragement for us to hold fast, not to drift away, to always say it out loud, to always profess it, to always confess Jesus, not not being ashamed of Jesus. So the Greek word there is homologia. Uh, homologia. Okay, you know what the word homo means? No, it means one. Logia is a statement or word. So that means we just hold on to one statement, one confession. That's what it means, confession. For we do not have a high priest incapable of sympathizing with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. So, again, he's going back to where he left in chapter 2, verse 18. We already discussed that in letter A. He understands our weaknesses, and he was victorious over temptation. He did not commit any sin. Obviously, only the Lord Jesus Christ did not commit any sin. Right? We accept that. Now, what do we mean by the great high priest who passed through the heavens? Well, chapter 9, verse 24 explains that further. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with hands, the representation of the true sanctuary. They had the temple at this time, at their time, in Jerusalem. They still had that we call the second temple. Okay, they still had that temple. So that means the book of Hebrews wasn't written after AD 70, right? Because in AD 70 the temple was destroyed. So this was much earlier than that. Obviously, it came to a point that they had to destroy the enemy had to destroy the temple. But in this case, the author of Hebrews was trying for us to imagine the temple. Okay, we may have our hope on this temple, right? But Jesus already fulfilled uh, his job on the true temple, the true sanctuary. It means the same thing, true sanctuary, true temple. But into heaven itself, it's a greater temple than the one on Jerusalem. It's in the temple, the sanctuary in heaven. And only Jesus, the high priest, can become a high priest on that temple. He appears now in God's presence for us. Now, that's very important is because if he's gonna mediate for us, it's gonna be our help for our sins, for our temptations and as we experience persecutions, Jesus is able to help us because he is in the very presence of God. He sits at the right hand of God. That's we discussed that in chapter 1 and chapter 2. So Jesus is our high priest, is our priest of the true heavenly sanctuary. So we don't have to wait for Jesus to become a priest um, actually in Jerusalem. Someone who would replace Caiaphas, or by the time I don't think Caiaphas was still the high priest there. But Jesus has already fulfilled that function as a high priest. So Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold on to our confession. So we are proud of Jesus because he is the high priest through the heavens, not just on here on earth. For we do not have I just restated that. Let me jump to verse 16. Okay. Therefore, let us confidently approach the throne of grace. So there is again the encouragement to be confident. If Jesus was able to enter the sanctuary in heaven, then we follow him. We approach the throne of grace. So when we come before God's presence, we receive grace. And not only that, to receive mercy because we have committed sin. And Jesus did not commit sin. We need a high priest who is perfect, who has never committed sin, so that he can mediate for those who have committed sin. That's us. So we come before the throne of grace. We follow him to the throne of grace. We have this confidence to enter the most holy place. That's in chapter 10. He says that. And also here, to receive mercy, because you remember the definition of mercy. Mercy is not receiving what you deserve. Grace is receiving what you don't deserve. Right? We receive forgiveness and pardon and blessing. That's grace. We don't deserve it. Mercy. We deserve punishment. And God doesn't give us punishment. That's mercy. And find grace whenever we need help, especially when we face trials and temptations. So our confidence to come to God is because of the victory of Jesus over temptation and sin, even with human weaknesses. He was, as verse 15 says there, he was tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. That's the kind of leader that we need. A faithful son and a high priest. Okay? So, it's like, I would like to emphasize, that help. We are not only encouraged, we're not cheered from afar by someone who has been victorious there. When we are running the race, even though Jesus finished running the race, he is helping us. We can find favor and mercy, receive mercy and help. So ask for help from Jesus. When you fail, ask for forgiveness. You'll receive mercy. When you're having difficulty here on earth, whatever temptation you're going through, it may not be persecution because very few of us receive that kind of persecution here in the Philippines. More of maybe religious persecution in the sense that you belong to another religion, I belong to another religion, sort of that stuff. And your religion is wrong, my religion is right, sort of those kind of accusations. But when you are persecuted, whatever temptation you're going through, ask help from Jesus Christ. He is faithful son, and he was victorious. Finally, Jesus is a faithful priest for the people of God. So he started that idea in chapter 2, verse 18. He continues with that idea in chapter 5, verse 1. For every high priest is taken from among the people. So therefore, Jesus is from among us. That's what we pointed out in letter A. He became a brother for us. He became a human being. Let's read that again. For every high priest is taken from among the people and appointed to represent them before God, to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. So just like Aharon, who was the first high priest in the Levitical priesthood, he was taken from among the people. He did not come from heaven. Verse 2, he is able to deal compassionately with those who are ignorant and erring. So people do commit sin, just like us. Okay, but our high priest has compassion over us, since he is also subject to weakness, and for this reason he is obligated to make sin offerings for himself as well as for the people. Now, again, to be high priest, Jesus had to become a human being. So Jesus took form of a human being. As a high priest must have compassion of sinners. Why? It's because if he doesn't have compassion on them, then he will not intercede for them. So what would happen most of the times? Most of the times he would reprimand the ignorant and the erring. Why do you keep on committing sins? No. Instead of that, he showed compassion to us because he knows we are weak because he experienced weaknesses as well. And therefore, Jesus Christ, because he is so compassionate for us, he is interceding for us to God as a high priest. Jesus understands our weaknesses. That is why he is faithful. He faithfully did his job as a high priest. And we glorify God for that. We glorify Jesus for that. He was subject to weakness. He fully understands. He had to eat. He had to receive beating. He had to receive rejection. He had to receive curses from people. Um, all, all of the horrible things that people could give to him, he received them. And we know that he received so much of it during his crucifixion. Passion and crucifixion. Verse 4. No one assumes this honor on his own initiative, but only when called to it by God, as in fact Aharon was. So also Christ did not glorify himself in becoming high priest, but the one who glorified him was God, who said to him, "You are my son; today I have fathered you." So we already quoted this in chapter 1, which we studied last week. Though Jesus is the Son of God, he did not pursue glory that he deserves, but he waited for God to glorify him. Why? It's because becoming a human being, that means surrendering that glory. And we also find this in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 11, that Jesus, in the hymn says there that Jesus, even though he was in the form of God, did not, uh, 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 what was the word? Uh, yeah, did not consider himself a worthy of, parang, to hold on to that, right? I think that's the idea. Okay, so want as he humbled himself, he had to fulfill his job so that God would glorify him. And that is why it said, "You are my son, today I have fathered you," because he has humbled himself into a status uh, of a son, right? So also Christ did not glorify himself. Okay, I repeated that. Verse 6. So as also in another place, God says, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Now, why is this very important? This is in fulfillment of Psalm 110, verse 4. Okay, Psalms is always quoted here in Hebrews. Jesus was not a regular Levite high priest. Remember in the tabernacle and eventually in the temple, all the priests there must be Levites. Okay, and he was appointed by God through Moses, and the first one was Aharon. But the high priest where Jesus belonged to is in the order of Melchizedek. Now, who's this guy? He was the high priest in Salem, which was Jerusalem, during the time of Abraham. So if you remember, Moses was about in the 1200s. Okay, Abraham was about in the 1600s. So during those times, or some would say even 1800s. During those times, Abraham, when he rescued Lot against five kings who were fighting four kings, and he defended the four kings here, right, to rescue Lot, right? After he won the war for them, he went to Jerusalem or Salem at that time, and he offered tithes to the priest king there. Why priest king? He was also the king and he was also the priest. He's functioning dual function, right? So the name of that guy is Melchizedek. Now, I don't think it's really a name. It's probably a title, because the word malach is king. Sometimes in Arabic, malki. The important thing here is the M, L, and K. Those three letters. And Zedek is where we get the word righteousness. Sometimes it would be interpreted as righteous king. Sometimes it would be interpreted as my king is righteousness. Okay, so Abraham submitted himself to the priest Melchizedek by the fact that he offered tithes to him. So Jesus is not under Moses because he is not a high priest in the order of Levi. He is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, who was the priest of Avram. He was Avram at that time. So, if the high priest of Avram was Melchizedek, and that means Jesus is greater than Moses, greater than Avram, and in fact, in the order of Melchizedek. So Jesus belongs to a higher order of priesthood. Melchizedek, that's the idea there. Okay. During his earthly life, Christ offered both requests and supplications with loud cries and tears. So the picture here is he was very human, that he had to make requests instead of just commanding his angels to come and rescue me and defend me and punish my enemies. No, he offered requests and supplications. Supplications, so it means petitions to God. With loud cries and tears, that means he was really begging. Because it's the threat was real and quite scary. Come to think of it, difficult to go through, but of course Jesus overcame them. To the one who's able to save him, and that's God the Father, from death, and he was heard because of his devotion. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through the things he suffered. So as a high priest, Jesus showed how to live with weaknesses. So he is our model. How to live with weaknesses, how to bear sufferings. You have to always make requests and supplications to God so seriously that if you have to cry out loud and shed some tears because of the difficulty, then do so, because Jesus did so. Jesus had to cry out to God, beg God to save him from death. He also prayed for us with intensity. So that means it wasn't like a simple request. Oh, Father, it's so easy for us, this job. I know you're going to save me, so I'm just going to wait for you to save me. It's also fine. No. God, save me from this hour. But for this hour, I have come. That's what he said in John. He was praying. And when he was praying in Gethsemane, he was perspiring so much. It's like he was dripping. He was profusely sweating. It said there that it's like a flow of a blood. When blood flows, it keeps on flowing. That how he was sweating so profusely. Okay, because he was really preparing himself to go through the sufferings, which was he would be arrested, beaten up, and crucified eventually. This is the point. He cried out to God. He was heard because of his devotion. Take that seriously, my brothers and sisters. God hears us because God hears Jesus. Hears us because of Jesus' devotion. God heard Jesus because of his devotion. Now God hears us because of Jesus' devotion. We should also be devoted to God. Take prayer seriously. That's why if we live comfortably, we don't tend to pray intensely. Right? That is why Jesus didn't really pursue for these worldly things. He decided to face weaknesses, temptation, trial, persecution, insults, rejection, curses, everything the world could give him, hatred. Now, you may be experiencing some sort of those, maybe because you have behaved badly or because, well, for some people, just because of their looks. People dislike them because of their looks. Well, that's nothing compared to what Jesus has gone through. As Peter said, well, if we suffer because we have committed sin, now what gain is that? We deserve that. But if we suffer because of our faithfulness to Jesus, then that means a lot. That's the kind of suffering that is meaningful. So we should also be devoted, just as Jesus was devoted and he was heard. You want your prayers to be heard. When you say devoted, that is like you're giving all your effort. You're really concentrated on the Father, right? He learned obedience through the things that he suffered. So Jesus did not cheat his way in obeying God. I know how to obey God. I'm not a naturally obedient son of God. Well, of course he was. But by becoming human, he decided, I want to learn this. I'm not going to cheat my way out of it. He learned it. We should also learn obedience through sufferings. That means sufferings has great benefits. It teaches us obedience. When we have so much things and we don't need some other stuff, or we don't need someone over us to tell us what to do, then we won't learn obedience. You learn obedience when you're listening to someone else, when you're listening to the Heavenly Father. We're almost done. And by being perfected in this way, that means he completed his job. He became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So we're not just, Jesus obeyed the Father, now we obey Jesus Christ. And he was designated by God as high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Perfected. Achievement when obedience is fulfilled. Right? By being perfected in this way, through obedience, there is no salvation from anyone else. He became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So that is why we have to come to Jesus and hold on to Jesus. Hold on to our confession. Again, we talked about Melchizedek. He is the priest king of Salem, to whom Abraham offered tithes in Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 to 24. That is why the order of Melchizedek is superior to the order um, of Levi, okay, which will be discussed in the next few chapters, but we're not going there right now. All right. So Jesus was a faithful brother in the family of God. He had to become human so that he can experience what we experience, and even worse. He was a faithful son in the house of God. He was thinking about obeying God, completing the mission that he gave him. And he was a faithful priest. In fact, high priest for the people of God. He is helping us in our difficulties, in our persecution, in our suffering, in our temptations. That's why we have to learn obedience to Jesus Christ. Hold on to that confession. Never drift away.